Hey everyone, I'm Emer back in Ashbourne Library for another Books at Bedtime session. So this evening we're going to read Diarmuid Grainne and the Vengeance of Fionn. This was published by Poolbeg. The story was adapted by Carroll and illustrated by Derry, Dillon. Diarmuid Grainne and the Vengeance of Fionn. One day, a long time ago, Fionn Mac Cumhaill was feeling very grumpy. "Why should I be fed up?" he said to himself. "I'm the leader of the fianna, and they are the greatest band of warriors ever. I've plenty of gold, and all I have to do if I want to know anything is taste the thumb I burnt as a boy, cooking the salmon of wisdom. Why then am I so exceedingly grumpy?" As was his habit in times of trouble, he sucked his thumb and knew at once what ailed him. "I'm lonely ever since my wife Magnus died, and I'm upset because Cormac Mac won't speak to me. That's why I'm bad-tempered." Cormac was the High King of Ireland. He hired the fianna to protect him, but every so often he used to think Fionn was getting too uppity and wanted to take over his powers. This was one of those times. "What will I do?" Fionn wondered, sucking his thumb again, and the answer came at once. "The king has a beautiful young daughter, Grainne. If I married her, I wouldn't be lonely anymore, and Cormac would stop thinking I want to get rid of him, since I'd be one of the family." So Fionn asked the High King for his daughter's hand. At first, Cormac was very frosty. "Grainne is only 16, he said, "while you, Fionn, are older than me." "I treat her very well," said Fionn, "and the marriage would bind me to you. I'd be a loyal son-in-law." Cormac saw the sense of this and warmed to the idea. "Leave it with me. Grainne can be a bit difficult." The High King told his daughter she was to marry Fionn, a great warrior, wise and wealthy, strong and brave. He never mentioned age. Grainne had met Fionn only a few times over the years. She didn't connect the man she'd seen with her father's words. Instead, she imagined a marvellous youth, a champion, and was pleased. The date was set for the betrothal feast. When Grainne saw Fionn at the feast, she was shocked into silence. "Grey hair," she thought, "a bald spot, wrinkles." Fionn, on the other hand, marvelled. "So beautiful, and she doesn't chatter. She is a treasure." If Fionn ever needed his thumb, it was now, but he didn't put it in his mouth, and so he didn't know how Grainne felt or what would happen. The girl might have been speechless, temporarily, but she could certainly think, and now she looked around for some way to escape. It was then she saw Diarmuid chatting to some friends nearby. He was a young fianna warrior, tall and handsome. It is said that when any girl saw the small mole on his forehead, she fell in love with him instantly. Grainne was no different. "That's who I'll marry," she thought, "for he's a prize worth having." And so she recovered her voice and smiled at Fionn, saying, "I must speak to all of my guests, but don't worry, I'll be back to you soon." Fionn let her go. "Her voice is such sweet music," he thought. While all were drinking merrily, Grainne slipped a potion into every goblet except Diarmuid's, and soon everyone in the great hall was asleep except for the two of them. "We have no time for long courtly conversations," Grainne told him bluntly, "so I'll be plain. Will you elope with me?" "Sorry?" "Could I be any plainer, Diarmuid? Will you run away with me?" "But you're betrothed to Fionn and he's my chief, so no, I won't run away with you." "Well, I'm not going to marry Fionn. You can forget that. He's ancient. Surely you can see you and I are much more suited. What are you afraid of? I thought you were supposed to be brave as well as handsome." "I'm very brave, Grainne, and I'm extremely handsome." "So run away with me then. Otherwise, I'll put a gesh on you, and you know what that means." "Of course, it's a binding obligation. If I refuse it, I'll be called a coward, and if I accept, I'll betray Fionn and he'll hunt us down." "So what will you do?" "Well, you're very beautiful and interesting and not a bit soppy like some girls. So let's go before anyone wakes up." "Right. First, though, you must cover that spot in your forehead with your hair. I'm not having any more girls falling for you." Sometime later, when Fionn woke and realised what had happened, he was raging. Now he sucked his thumb vigorously and knew the couple had a few hours' start and were heading towards the River Shannon. He sent his best warriors in pursuit with orders to capture them, alive or dead. At that time, the Shannon was surrounded by huge forests, which provided great hiding places. Yet, all Fionn had to do was suck his thumb to know where they were. Diarmuid and Gráinne knew this, so they had to keep moving. Many times they had a narrow escape. Once, a warrior was a few steps behind Gráinne and reached out to grab her. But the girl's foster father was Angus Og, a god from the other world. He'd been watching out for her and covered her now with a cloak of invisibility. The warrior was astounded. One minute the girl was in his grasp, the next she had disappeared. Diarmuid took advantage of the confusion, leaped high over the heads of his pursuers and escaped. Once Fionn sent his best hounds, Bran and Scolan, to catch them. His hope was that they would tear Diarmuid to pieces. The dogs were great hunters, tracking by smell and never failing to catch their prey. Except this once, for they knew Diarmuid well and were fond of him. Once they caught his scent in the forest. Instead of attacking silently and suddenly, the hounds barked madly in excitement, giving the couple plenty of time to escape. By now, they'd spent almost a year constantly moving through the forest. Gráinne was expecting a baby, which made her stop for rest more often. One day, she came across some rowan berries and began to crave them. Nothing would do her but to taste them. However, they were guarded by a fierce, one-eyed giant, Servan. "May I have some of your berries, please?" Gráinne asked. "No, definitely not," the giant said. Then he added, "If you touch them, I'll kill you." "Did anyone ever tell you you're horrible and mean?" "They did. I killed whoever said so." He reached for Gráinne. Diarmuid stepped between them and pushed the giant but couldn't budge him. Servan laughed and raised his huge iron club, but before he could bring it down on Diarmuid, the warrior threw a handful of clay and grit in the giant's eye and he was momentarily blinded. While Servan was coping with the pain and blurriness, Diarmuid seized his huge club and with one well-aimed blow managed to kill him. Now Gráinne no longer felt like eating the rowan berries and Diarmuid was a bit miffed. "After all the trouble I went to killing that giant." There's no understanding women. Fionn was getting a little tired of hunting the couple, especially when he heard they'd had their first child. Angus Og persuaded him to leave them alone. "You should remember how well Diarmuid fought for you when he was in the fianna," the god told Fionn, "and remember too what it was like to be young and in love." So Fionn let them be and they settled in Sligo where they reared 5 children. After some years, Angus Og again went to Fionn and said, "It's time to make your peace properly with Diarmuid, for he often talks of the old days with you and his comrades. He has only praise for you." And so Fionn invited the warrior on a hunt in the forest. But Diarmuid was savaged by a wounded boar and lay dying, barely breathing. Fionn had the gift of healing. All he had to do was carry water in his cupped hands from the nearby stream to Diarmuid, let the warrior drink, and instantly he would recover. Twice Fionn was bringing the water, but each time he thought of how Diarmuid had betrayed him and let it trickle from his fingers. The third time he made himself think of Diarmuid's bravery in the past and how often they'd fought alongside each other. "He was a good friend to me," he thought. He carried the water for the third time, not spilling a drop. But it was too late, and Diarmuid was dead. Some say Gráinne died of grief a short time later. Others think she married Fionn, for she had a practical mind and 5 children to rear. Fionn would have lavished luxury and attention on her, and since he was old, he wouldn't have lasted too long, and she would have been a rich widow. But Gráinne had plenty of spirit, and many believed she did neither of the above. They imagined her rearing her children without any stepfather, for she had loved Diarmuid from the moment of setting eyes on him, and she'd never meet his like again. In this picture, her children were very fond of her and liked nothing better, on a frosty winter's evening, by the fire than to hear their mother's stories of the wild adventures she and their father had shared all those years before. The end.